And where did the Jews fit in all of this? Were I understood that many of them were killed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Jews, even before, I mean, and here's again one of those things where people try to demonize the Crusades because they attacked and killed Jews, and they did. But the Jews were being attacked and killed by Christians even before that. Well, what happened is, a lot of it was mostly the peasant crusaders, not the actual knights and the formal armies. But a lot of them would go and they'd get riled up and say, "Why are we traveling all this distance during their long trek to kill infidels who hate Jesus when we have them right here, the Jews who killed him?" And they would rile themselves up and they'd go attack and kill them.
And there were some terrible pogroms, weren't there?
Yeah, yeah. But, it's also important to know that the church and the leaders were against it. And
Against the pogroms.
yeah, and they would issue edicts saying you have to leave the Jews alone, and they would come in their defense. So it was almost like what always happens. You have the rabble, but the actual church policy was not to persecute them, and the Crusader policy was not to persecute them or do any of that. But of course, you're going to have the bad apples who act on whatever impulse they want to just plunder them on whatever pretext. And I go to the Middle East or history section, all the books, and I'm familiar with them, they're all the politically correct books that say the exact opposite of what I'm telling you.
Yeah.
So if you mean well and you want to read a book and you educate yourself and you go to Barnes and Nobles, you're just gonna you're gonna learn the exact opposite. And that's why I always find it funny that you're better off being ignorant, because if you're ignorant, if you're an learned person, maybe just dropped high school and you didn't go to college, you're probably gonna have a better understanding of what we're talking about from an instinctual level, at least.
Yeah.
But if you go, the further you go into higher education and formally study these things, what happens is you learn the exact opposite, but then you're proud of it and you're so zealous about what because I got a degree. I know this. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But what happened is you've been indoctrinated in lies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So look, you've mentioned a couple of books that have changed the popular understanding of, let's say, the Crusades and these various other moments. But could you pinpoint to a specific moment in time when the narrative changed from, as you described earlier, there was a common understanding in Europe about Islam aggression in Europe, to now where most people have no idea? Is there a moment in time where that
the transitional phase? Yeah, which is a good question. So, okay, honestly, it all really starts with, and a lot of people don't like to hear this, but with the Protestant Reformation. Okay, because with the break with the Catholic Church was a need to, I don't want to use the word demonize, but whatever, justify the break. And so anything the Catholic Church did became jaundiced and kind of bad, including the Crusades. And, the Protestants made good points, indulgences, et cetera, et cetera. I get that. That makes sense. But you got this move now where, like, whatever we can, however we can make Catholics look bad, we should. And that was the beginning. So Martin Luther, he condemned the Crusades. And then he condemned, when the Turks were actually invading Vienna or coming towards Austria, he actually said, don't fight back. And he said, this is God's way of punishing the Catholics and church, until they got close to where he was. And he actually changed his tune, literally, and wrote a new saying, no, you can't fight back. It is just war. I'm not lying to you. This is true. I can give you the evidence.
How's that for motivated reasoning?
Yeah. So it really starts with the Protestant. And look, I don't want to get into I'm not a theologian. I'm not arguing who's right theologically. I'm just saying, as a historical development, the rift in Christendom between Protestants and Catholics created a sort of hatred towards the Crusades, okay? Because it was another thing to point at and say, oh, look. And they also, this was also the beginning of the rehabilitation of Muslims in the eyes of Europeans. Because if Muslims are the enemies of the bad guys, the Catholics, they must be good, okay? And this is why till today, it's actually Protestant nations that are suffering from Islam, because they're the ones who have completely opened their doors and who follow this logic, which is Muslims are great. It's the Catholics you got to worry about. Okay, or at least elements of it still subconsciously maybe exist. And that's why you have Muslims running amok in Scandinavia and Sweden, in the UK and in Germany. But then you look at countries like Hungary and Poland, which is Hungary, I know, is Catholic, and so is Poland, and you don't see that sort of thing.
Here we have an interview from a Greek Orthodox church, and these are the people who have suffered the most under Islam, the Christians that have really suffered, because they're the ones in the Middle East, and they were the ones that were that were subjugated by the Muslims. And one of the things that the priest said is because these were all Christian lands. We're talking about Syria, Egypt, Morocco, the Middle East. Those were all Christian lands that belonged to the Greek Orthodox Church. And he said it this way. He said, it's like if somebody comes into your home and puts a sword to your neck and tells you everything that you have, everything that you own now belongs to me. What would you call that? That is called theft. And that's exactly what the Muslims did to the Christians, to the Greek Orthodox Church. Also, I want to show you guys an example of how the Crusades have been demonized on TV shows from the History Channel. Because you're going to see how they give Saladin and the Muslims a free get-out-of-jail-free card for being barbaric and committing war crimes, saying, oh yeah, that's just how it was back then, and we're teaching the Christians a lesson. But when the Christians did it, the exact same thing, they were condemned as war criminals and being barbaric. So let me show you this double talk from the History Channel.
There was no mercy for the Hospitallers and the Templars, the finest knights of the Crusader states, dedicated to fighting the forces of Islam.
The Sultan chose to put them to death, to kill them all without exception.
It was partially the decision of Saladin to impose some shock, and or these you say are your best warriors. There, they exist no longer.
That Saladin was using those hostages as a way to drag out the negotiations and wear down the Franks. Richard became increasingly frustrated, and eventually he did something that some people have considered a war crime, and that he was criticized for at the time.
Richard's actions that day at Acre have gone down in history as one of the most ruthless episodes throughout all the Crusades.
The enemy brought out the prisoners, for whom God had decreed martyrdom. With the sword, they killed them in cold blood.
The massacre of the Muslim prisoners that were taken in Acre is still talked about. It was a very brutal episode. Richard was totally brutal, in my opinion.
It's like I said, there's like a lot of double talk, but it's not just from those who are sympathetic to the Muslims. There's a lot of double talk from the atheists, those on the left. Like I said, they want to demonize Christianity. One of the things I talked about, how like in communism, you have to demoralize society. So what they want to do is condemn Christianity as a whole, make sure that the kids don't go to church or learn the Bible, because the Bible brings morality. And once the kids have been demoralized, they are ripe for the takeover, for like a communist takeover. And I remember reading Reagan's biography. He talked about how communists were infiltrating Hollywood. And it was really bad. In fact, Ronald Reagan said that they were going to disfigure his face. This was back when he was an actor, because they didn't want him in Hollywood. They wanted to get rid of him because he was a conservative. But we see this a lot. So that's why if you see movies that demonize Christianity, it's coming from the left. And it's wrong, and shame on them for doing that. But you have to remember, God's going to hold everyone accountable. All the prophecies of the Bible are being fulfilled. Jesus fulfilled over 450 prophecies. And today there are over 100 prophecies that are being fulfilled as we speak. So we are literally watching Bible prophecy, and we are approaching the time when Jesus Christ is coming back soon. We're going to conclude the Truth Crusades, but stay close to God, stay close to Jesus, and Jesus is coming soon. God bless you all.